welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Tuesday, February 5th. Japan says China pointed a military radar at its destroyer. Syria's deputy foreign minister is in China for talks, and a tragedy from the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Military tension between China and Japan is bubbling over as a Chinese warship is accused of pointing a missile radar at a Japanese ship. The Chinese ship was in the East China Sea to conduct military drills, but the latest incident has Japan crying foul.
Japan has accused the Chinese warship of pointing missile radars at its military targets. This takes the already tense feud between the two Asian powers to another level. Japan's defense minister Itsunori Onodera lodged a formal complaint today. He said the Chinese fleet carrying out naval drills in the East China Sea made aggressive moves near the disputed Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. The incident occurred on January 30th. The Chinese regime has been conducting training drills it asserts are part of normal training, but Japan says a Chinese Navy frigate directed its fire control radar at the Japanese destroyer. Onodera also spoke of a similar previously undisclosed incident. On January 19th, a Chinese frigate also targeted a Japanese military helicopter. In both incidents, the Chinese aggressor eventually turned off the radar without firing. Tensions between the two nations have been building since the Japanese government purchased the islands from their private Japanese owner. Last month, the Chinese military received an official directive to Beijing preparing for war. Although no military clash has happened, both sides have scrambled fighter jets and fears are growing that an armed conflict could accidentally or intentionally get sparked.
Syria's deputy foreign minister is in China on a 4-day visit as the Syrian crisis continues. Faisal al-Makdad met with China's foreign minister Yang Jiechi today. The Chinese regime has tried to stay neutral in the Syrian conflict, but the international community has urged it to do more to curtail the military onslaught by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Chinese regime has opposed military intervention to push al-Assad out, instead urging discussions between his regime and opposition forces. Last year, China and Russia voted together to block 3 UN Security Council resolutions. They were aimed at pressuring al-Assad to end the civil war. The almost 2-year conflict has killed more than 60,000 people. Before he leaves on Thursday, Mr. al-Makdad is also expected to meet China's Vice Foreign Minister Zhai Jun. For years now, China's black jails have been a source of concern. Human rights organizations have pressured the Chinese regime to put a stop to them. But despite their widespread publicity, the government has denied their existence. But today, a Beijing court did an about-face on the matter.
A Beijing court has sentenced 10 men for illegally keeping petitioners in secret detention centers. The men, all from Henan province, were given sentences of between 6 months and 2 years in prison. The unofficial detention centers are commonly known as black jails. The court decision on Tuesday is a surprising acknowledgement that these illegal detention facilities exist. China's central authorities have previously denied black jails exist in the country. That's despite widespread accounts by petitioners who say their attempts to air grievances in Beijing are often cut short. Individuals known as interceptors are dispatched by local governments around the country. Their task is to stop petitioners from complaining to Beijing authorities. That's because local bureaucrats are penalized for each petitioner that gets to the Central Appeals Office in Beijing. In 2011, Beijing's Municipal Public Security Bureau supposedly started a campaign to crack down on black jails. This was one of the first instances that state media reported that black jails exist. Many petitioners report physical abuse during their detention, including beatings, rape, and sometimes death. In today's court ruling, the men were found guilty of detaining 11 petitioners last May, also from Henan province. They were also ordered to compensate the petitioners they detained illegally for several days.
It's almost 5 years since the Olympic Games in China, but while the competitors, spectators and the colorful decorations have all gone, the Games have left their mark on China, one of family separation and suffering.
It was a dazzling spectacle, the tightly choreographed opening ceremony of the 2008 Olympic Games in China. It captured the world's imagination, but now the iconic Bird's Nest Stadium sits quiet, fallen into disrepair, and a much more sinister legacy of the Olympic Games is left behind. This woman is dying, the result of years of torture and imprisonment, driven to the brink of insanity. Her name is Chen Zhenping, a Falun Gong practitioner. She was arrested on the eve of the Olympics, along with scores of human rights activists, dissidents, and religious adherents. It was a wave of massive crackdowns before the Olympics. With all eyes turned to China, the communist regime wanted an image of harmony.
My mother was put in jail 5 times. She was released in 2003 and rearrested in 2008. During this 5-year interval, the authorities placed us under residential surveillance. My mother was banned from going outside home. We were deprived of our own legal rights.
Since her arrest, Chen has been tortured and deprived of sleep in Henan Xinxiang women's prison. Prison guards have tried to make Chen renounce her belief in the Falun Gong spiritual practice. For 40 months, family members were forbidden from visiting her, until August 2012, when Chen's brother was allowed to visit. What he saw was a sister too ill to stand, suffering from a nervous breakdown.
Before 1999, my mother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. Doctors in 5 hospitals told us that she only had 3 months left to live. But later, after she began to practice Falun Gong, she quickly regained her health and had very good temper and mentality.
And now the practice that saved her life is the reason the Chinese regime has made Chen and her family suffer. Shortly after Chen's arrest in 2008, her daughter Jin went to the local Jiahuan court to appeal, but the judge handling the case publicly beat her. She was 19. After being forced into hiding, with the help of her older sister living in Finland and the Finnish government, she was rescued from China and now lives with her husband. Amnesty International has issued urgent action calls for Chen Zhenping on 4 different occasions. In 2010, Chen Zhenping's case was submitted to the UN, and a year later, the European Commission for Human Rights included Chen Zhenping on a list of prisoners of conscience it urged the CCP to immediately release.
And coming up after the break, why taxes could go up in Hong Kong, China's toxic air drifts over to Japan, and southern China hub faces travel rush for the Chinese New Year. And welcome back. Taxes in Hong Kong may be on the rise. The region's chief executive is pushing to build public housing and develop land. It's causing financial strain and could put Hong Kong's budget books in the red, according to accounting firm KPMG China. Hong Kong currently has a 40 billion Hong Kong dollar surplus for this financial year, which ends in March. But KPMG's tax partner Jennifer Wong says the development plan could lead to a deficit of 45.9 billion Hong Kong dollars next year if the government doesn't raise taxes. KPMG says instead of increasing individual income taxes, Hong Kong regulators could impose a goods and services tax to narrow the budget gap. According to the South China Morning Post, Wang says a tax rate of 3 to 5% could prevent the deficit. A 2006 proposal to introduce the GST was widely opposed by accountants and the public. Hong Kong's finance secretary will be announcing his budget at the end of the month, but right now there is no sign that the goods and sales tax will be implemented. Fed up with corruption, Chinese citizens have been taking matters into their own hands. They've exposed Communist Party officials and others who own wealth that are beyond their means. Now a woman in China has been detained for owning 20 properties, but the case of another policeman may make a case seem like nothing.
Chinese police on Monday detained a bank official from northwest China after she used faked IDs to amass more than 20 properties. Gong Ai has been dubbed house sister by Chinese netizens. It's a name given to individuals with property portfolios way above their official pay. But it seems Chinese authorities can't catch people fast enough for illegally owning properties. A senior police from Lufeng City in southern Guangdong province has been accused of owning 192 properties. State-run Xinhua News Agency reported today that Zhao Haibing also used fake IDs to purchase homes. Some of the apartments were registered under a company Zhao set up. Zhao, also a senior figure in the local Communist Party branch, denies he owns the properties. He said he only managed them. Police are investigating the case. These cases have sparked outrage throughout China, where ordinary citizens find it difficult to save enough money to purchase just one home. In the case of Gong Ai, she obtained fake IDs from police and purchased property totaling 1 billion yuan, or just under $160 million. She was detained by police in Shanxi province on Monday, state-run media reports. She's expected to be charged with forging official documents and stamps.
The toxic smog that hit China last month is riding the wind and crossing over to Japan, and people there are starting to complain. Here's more.
China has been battered with heavy smog and off-the-chart air quality readings in the past month, and now the wind is blowing China's toxic air over to its neighbors. Recently, Japan has seen increased concentrations of PM 2.5 particles in the southwestern parts of the country, and Japanese media have been extensively covering the moving airborne pollution. The Japanese Ministry of the Environment told the AFP that access to their online air pollution readings has been almost impossible since last week. Japanese authorities have already added new monitoring stations and ordered more research in response.
If you think logically, this pollution is coming over to Japan on trade winds. So when that trade wind gets stronger, we're likely to see this pollution blanket all of Japan. So I have ordered an investigation into how this happens, what effects on people it will have, and how urgently to deal with this issue.
According to Japan's environmental laws, air quality beyond the daily average of 35 micrograms per cubic meter is deemed unsafe. And last week, some parts in Nagasaki Prefecture reached an average of 41 micrograms, according to Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun. The increased air pollution comes after heavy smog and haze battered eastern China last month. In Beijing, the U.S. Embassy reported that concentration of tiny particles in the air reached over 700 micrograms in mid-January. Levels above 300 a day are considered hazardous by the World Health Organization.
China's Guangdong province is gearing up for an unprecedented travel rush, despite the country's new high-speed rail line. Tickets for the world's longest high-speed rail from Beijing to Guangzhou are just too expensive for many Chinese.
China's New Year travel rush has begun, and Guangdong province is expected to see record numbers of travelers this year, according to state media. The world's longest high-speed train, launched last year, doesn't seem to be affecting the congestion. The new high-speed rail connects Beijing and the southern city of Guangzhou, covering almost 1,500 miles in less than 2 hours. The trains will reach nearly 190 miles per hour. However, high-speed rail tickets cost significantly more than ordinary train tickets. The assistant station chief of Guangzhou South Station, Yu Hui, said the number of rail passengers is higher than last year.
There are 150,000 passengers passing through the station every day, probably a 5% increase from last year.
The travel rush is making it harder to find a ticket, said a local passenger.
It's still quite hard to get a ticket now, but like I said, even though the cost is higher, I want to go home because being with my family is the best thing.
Another passenger says it's easier to find high-speed train tickets.
I think it's better to take the high-speed train to go home due to the difficulty of buying an ordinary train ticket.
Chinese New Year is traditionally a time for families to come together. It falls on February 10th this year.
And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more on China-related topics, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus with Shelley Zhang. Stay tuned.